Welcome to the Supply Chain Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sheri Hinish, also called the Supply Chain Queen, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to our curated series within the Supply Chain Rev Pod, Student Voices. Today we have Madeline Creasman, who is the founder of Everchain, and we're going to talk all about ethical and responsible supply chains. Welcome, Madeline. It's so great to finally meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And so you're the founder of Everchain. I'd love to learn more about you, your origin story, and what Everchain does.
Sure. So we just launched this year. So Everchain Solutions is a supply chain firm, first and foremost. We prioritize optimization projects, but we also overlay sustainability and ethics metrics in our work. And how we do that is we go in, understand the processes from the top down, see where the process flows, match it with the data, figure out what the cost and pain points are, and then also overlay that with carbon tracking, labor tracking, you name it. So that's what we do. I would say the main problem we're trying to solve is 85% of consumers want companies to actively act sustainably. So that is the direct problem that we are targeting.
Wonderful. And a little bit about you, Madeline, because as a founder, as a woman in supply chain, just curious about your journey. Like most people, at least when I was growing up, didn't even know what supply chain was. And now we have all these wonderful people that are joining the industry. So how did you find supply chain? What made you curious to found Everchain?
I do have quite an interesting story. So my background is actually in agriculture. So growing up, in high school, I grew up in a very rural area and was the FFA president, lived, breathed, and ate FFA, which is an agricultural organization. Actually got into college to study agriculture as well. But it was the peak of COVID when I graduated college. So the first job offer I got was for Amazon in operations. And I had no experience in supply chain, but I did have some experience in management and leadership. So I jumped right on in and worked with Amazon in operations and fulfillment and loved the way that it operated. I remember my first few weeks there. I just sat there staring at the lines of conveyors and following them and seeing where they all went and understanding how the process is interconnected. And I asked a lot of questions. I was known for asking a lot of questions. I will say, as a woman in supply chain, and you know this firsthand, there aren't as many of us as there should be, and our voices aren't amplified as much as they should be. So, starting Everchain was overcoming a lot of the stigma or a lot of the almost imposter syndrome of a woman in supply chain and a woman in leadership. So Everchain is an embodiment of amplifying my voice and a lot of the voices before me.
I love that. I love that. I want to know more about your background because you said you have a love and passion for agriculture. And so I do too. And we're very similar in that way. And what are your thoughts right now with what's happening in the world with climate change and also with climate migration and food systems and how there's a big shift in agriculture toward regenerative agriculture that incorporates a lot of ancestral wisdom and things that we may have forgotten as human beings?
I would say my background in agriculture has allowed me to see much deeper context for a lot of the situations in the world, whether it be politics or the economy. Working in agriculture, you see the very bare, basic natural processes of the world. And it allows you to understand that we really only need a few things to survive as humans, right? But in order for us to be comfortable as humans and have a higher quality of life, that's where supply chain comes in. So I believe we've gotten accustomed to a certain quality of life, and that has put us in globalization as well in society. And that has applied a lot of pressure to the supply chain itself. And that's why we're here. And that's why we do the work that we do, is not only just to bring products to people, but it's also to allow pressure put on the supply chain and demand put on the supply chain to be met. We went from an agricultural society, right, and just needing bare food and basic necessities, food, milk, meat, to something we saw on TikTok that we thought was really cool, to,
Yeah.
styles that change 3 or 4 times throughout the year. And so our demand has grown, our trends have grown, our turnaround on trends have grown. And that globalization, that interconnected supply chain throughout the world, there's a lot of pressure on that. And we're seeing that right now with oil. And through the Hormuz Strait, 20% of oil has just been cinched off. So, and that's probably one of the most relevant examples I could give right now of how.
Well, I could think of one that's more relevant.
Sure, absolutely.
Some of the critical ingredients for fertilizer, like sulfur
Yes.
and urea, those are
Yes,
also caught in the Strait of Hormuz right now.
they
And
are.
so that would impact food systems probably through early 2028 if you cascade that out. Huge impact. You know what was interesting is your analogy around the want,
Yes,
not necessarily the need. And so if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and where maybe 100 years ago folks prioritized how they interact with natural systems or even agriculture, this whole mass consumerism society has actually been designed. And globalization, to your point, has created a lot of pressure, but also a lot of the extraction, a lot of the fragility, and a lot of the exposure around what we are calling resilience, but it's not really resilience because it's an incomplete answer
sure.
in a very bad system. So let's talk about some of the behavioral choices. And I love that you brought up need versus want. When we think about ethics and we think about our personal responsibility to show up in a supply chain, how does that translate when you're in a leadership role and when you're looking at trade networks and your commodity strategy or how your strategic sourcing strategy? How do you show up different in that operating model?
Sure. So, like the point you've just mentioned, sometimes we can use these terms, and it encompasses quite a bit. Ethics, sustainability. It encompasses quite a bit. Embedding ethics into decision making isn't simply just knowing when you have the right answer in front of you versus the wrong answer. It's also being cognizant of the effects, the front end offense effects and the back end effects, right? For instance, in procurement or just sourcing. So you can choose the product from the country that has the lower tariffs, but the product itself may not be as sustainably sourced. It may cost less, but it could have, higher emissions in production versus a country that has higher tariffs, but it is better sourced, lower carbon footprint. So that's probably one of the best examples of choosing ethics. So in that instance, you would have to very directly choose ethics and sustainability, and that would be choosing something that's more expensive because it's sustainably sourced. So it's almost an enmeshment of sustainability and ethics in this case. But ethics isn't always, as a leader, being presented with a right or wrong decision. It's being very cognizant of, the issues down the line,
Mhm.
the front end and the back end. Sure.
And just out of curiosity, because I know when a lot of people think about sustainable, there may be a carbon footprint element, and then there may be some level of human rights due diligence, but it's typically not beyond tier one, maybe tier two. And it can feel like a web of assumptions, maybe even an illusion that human rights are intact across the entire value chain, including the first 10 miles or the first mile. And so my question is, when we think about ethics, is it a feeling? Is it trust? Is it an action? Like, how would you describe an ethical supply chain?
These are wonderful questions because it challenges the assumption that has already been very present in our industry. Ethics is something, it's a feeling, of course. We're humans and humans are involved in the supply chain every step of the way. It is also actions, like I mentioned before. It is also something that needs to be defended, and I'm not going to say look good on paper, but it does need to have positive optics. And there are trade-offs, of course, in every decision that we make, but ethics in the context of supply chain it encompasses feelings with humans. It encompasses making the right decision, even if it does cost a little bit more. And I would say that's probably what our industry struggles with the most is it sometimes does cost more to make the ethical and sustainable decision.
Right. So it's a feeling and it's choosing differently, choosing ethically, responsibly. And so, what KPIs would be tied to that? Because I know we're going to get into compliance a little bit. When you say you have an ethical supply chain, you have ethical enter whatever integrated business process or function in a supply chain. It could be sourcing, it could be planning, it could be making, it could be producing, distributing, et cetera, right? So,
Sure.
what KPIs are tied or could give someone the visibility in unlock that they're being ethical?
Compliance allows you the framework before you can even get into KPIs, but I would say one of the KPIs I target in my projects is labor tracking, avoiding overtime, finding the sweet spot for labor hours versus production. I would say probably another a KPI that could be targeted would be wage, it could be safety conditions. And a small example of this would be ergonomics, how the workers are moving throughout their day to day. That's a huge part of safety.
So you mentioned labor, wage, and safety.
Yes.
And coming out of the EU, there's a really comprehensive piece of legislation called CSDDD, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Say it 3 times. It's really hard. It's a tongue twister. And so there are other dimensions of ethics that are included in CSDDD. And I think it's probably just in my career, probably one of the most detailed views of what it would take to envision a sustainable supply chain that also respects elements outside of just the natural environment, that really brings in a lot of what you just unpacked for us, Madeline. So with that in mind, if we push beyond, labor, casual labor, child labor, if we push beyond wage and look at fair living wage, if we push beyond safety, what does that look like if you close your eyes and really envision beyond some of the dimensions you've just unpacked for listeners?
This is going to be a very ironic answer, but it is my truth. A lot of the people closest to me have been very surprised that I've started a company in supply chain because I am very critical of capitalism. I am very critical, well, more so the negative side of capitalism. We think about the early 90s when we injected planned obsolescence into our processes and how we created products and how this injected more money into the economy from the consumers. But we look at today and we look at, again, the pressure that is now put on the supply chain that humans have to meet. And what that means is our norm around labor, our norm around a livable wage, our norm around a comfortable quality of life has completely changed because of our consumption and because of the things we think we need versus what we want. So what I'm saying here is the pressure we've put on capitalism and the capitalism is a machine in a way, and it's done wonders for our society, absolute wonders. And it's given millions to billions of people access to things that they wouldn't normally have had. But again, it's quite a strain and it's something we are accelerating, and injecting sustainability and ethics into my business model is almost my way of trying to make what difference I can, seeing this process.
Yeah, that's a great answer because it's all come at a cost, pun intended. Racing toward cost efficiency in a capitalist system is often at the expense of human rights, ethics, and our planet, and finite resources in the world that we share. And so let's zoom out a little bit, because you talked about how you've infused a lot of this different thinking and this philosophy and approach into Everchain. And to get practical for operators or practitioners that are listening, can you translate some of those clear priorities for small and mid-sized companies? If a growing company, for example, wants to be more resilient, wants to be more disciplined, and wants to infuse ethics and responsibility in their supply chain, where's the first place that they might start?
Yes. So with my firm, every process I implement, I try to be as simple as possible. Like I mentioned before, I do not promise full transformations. So when working with small to mid-sized manufacturers or businesses at large, most times they cannot afford to have a supply chain professional in-house. So they're working on engagement basis with a professional like me. And in working with them, a smaller scope, we're mostly going to be tracking labor hours, finding again that sweet spot between hours and production. And carbon footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are very easily traceable, even in small to mid-sized businesses. So starting with that framework is our basic framework, starting with a small to mid-sized company. And, usually that's about all that they really need. These aren't large corporations or multinational corporations that have warehouses or factories that could be um, endangering their local environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's no real like technology platform that's needed. So technology isn't a barrier per se.
I do have an ESG platform that I use to aid me in this tracking. I work through Seedling. It is a very, well, it is meant for small firms like myself, but it is very simple. Like I said, my whole mantra with my business model is to keep things very simple. And yeah, so really just tracking scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and human and labor tracking as well.
Okay. Awesome. And anything else that you would want listeners to keep front of mind, or any closing final words about what modern responsible supply chain looks like and how people can get started?
Yes, I think the largest issue we're facing right now is that these terms are being used in a lot of corporate initiatives, but they're not having action against them. So actually embedding ethics and sustainability in decision-making processes for all stakeholders, for all companies, is what needs to be seen. And I guess my final message would truly just be our comfort is also our pressure, I would say.
Our comfort is our pressure.
Yes, our comfort, our quality of life, the things that we have so easily at our fingertips, our access, going to a store, the products we consume, it's also our pressure, because we have supply lines that have to keep up with that. So our comfort is also our pressure. I know it's probably a very unpopular opinion, but it's just
It's
something.
not. It's
Yes.
not at all. It's crazy because we recorded an episode yesterday and I said pressure is a privilege. And so comfort is also a privilege. And it's very
Mhm.
synonymous with our discussion. It's interesting how the universe connects people who may not ever meet each other, but somehow we found each other and we have a lot of the same philosophies or underlying design philosophies for sure. And so, Everchain founder Madeline, how can folks get in touch with you in Everchain?
Yes, so I'm very active on LinkedIn with Everchain Solutions. I also have a website that shows a lot about myself, my work, and what Everchain is, what it stands for. Yes, but we also have an Instagram, of course, and everything is under Everchain Solutions.
Everchain Solutions. All right. Thank you so much, Madeline. Appreciate you coming on and sending you all the best.
Thank you. You as well, Sherry.